In alchemy, Mercury is known as the soul, the anima mundi, the collective unconscious, the invisible intermediary between the individual spirit and body, being able to transcend to all the realms of the world, and in the process bringing about the unity of opposites once again. This poetic ability to travel between realms is also deeply tied to the sign of Virgo, the sign of the goddess traveling between the underworld, the flowering world, and the greater heavens. Virgo is about the unification of all aspects of ourselves, the mind, the body, the spirit, as above, so below. To remember that to walk forward in fragmented parts feels frustrating at best, and isolating and dreadful at worst. That to find solace in remembering, reclaiming, returning, recollecting is one of the great explorations of being born into the world. So as Mercury, the great soul traveler, moves through its home sign of the goddess, there is deep poetry to be found here. We are travelers, learning to remember through living. This Mercury retrograde in Virgo represents a time of great insight and clarity. The internal lantern is lit, and the winding illumination begins. Answers we have been seeking may find us, and a devotional reminder to rest can arise at this time. Mercury retrograde is a time of deep wisdom and magic, and while we have spent the last 50 years in this culture trying to make it about modern inconveniences, to slow down enough to see, to really see, has always been the nourishing, recharging power of Mercury in this retrograde phase. Hello, my beautiful friends, my fellow space blobs. Welcome to a chat that gets me excited and feeling really nourished every single time we come back to this topic, all about Mercury retrograde. For those of you who have been with me for a little while, you know I like to check in with these every time they come through, which is about 3 times every single year. They're very consistent, very regular. Mercury retrograde and all its pre and post shadow phases takes up a good half of the year. So it's a really integral part of our yearly lives, of our regular cyclical lives, just like moon cycles or any of the other cycles that we move through. It's got this really beautiful way of giving us moments of check-in through each season. And that is why I think it's so powerful to take a moment at the beginning of each new Mercury retrograde to reclaim it, to tell beautiful stories, to feel connected to it, to feel that we are empowered by the experience. As I've mentioned so many times over the years, I feel like the modern interpretation of Mercury retrograde has a lot to do with technological inconvenience. But when we really take a moment to sit with this is so much about that soul traveler energy, being able to move through all the different levels of how we exist in the world, our shadow self, our conscious self, our subconscious, our physical self, our spiritual self, the way that we cycle through descending into the underworld, learning something new about ourselves, reascending into the light to share what we have learned, going through all of those cycles. I feel like Mercury is one of the best representations of what it actually means to feel like a human and to experience life as a human and as an organic being as well as a spiritual being. It's a really poetic little mover and shaker in the world. And moving through its home sign of Virgo is so beautiful. You know, Virgo is one of my favorite energies to work with. This idea of Virgo or the Virgin is really tied to feeling that we are whole in ourselves rather than fractured into hundreds of little pieces. And that's what that word really means. It's about wholeness and oneness and coming into a sense of oneness. And that's what Virgo energetics is a lot about. It's about being both part of the underworld, part of the flowering world, and part of the celestial world, the spiritual world, and how bringing all of these aspects together can really help us to move forward. And I know a lot of times we think of Mercury and Virgo as being about nitpicking and obsessing about the details, but this Mercury retrograde is going to be much more about reviewing the way that we obsess and try to gain control and releasing that and helping ourselves embody. So I'm very excited to chat about a few themes that I think are going to be really beautiful for these 3 weeks, and just in general as we do this journey with Mercury in Virgo, and some ways to explore and play with this energy and maybe understand it in yourself. And I hope to give everybody that nourishment. So let's get into it. The retrograde itself is happening between August 23rd and September 15th, all in Virgo. And there is a post-shadow phase and a pre-shadow phase. The pre-shadow phase started on August 4th and will go until the stationing retrograde on August 23rd. And the post-shadow phase begins on September 15th and goes till September 30th. So we'll be playing with these themes of Mercury in Virgo really all the way through into October, the beginning of October. And I know I'm just mentioning that because I know some people actually feel more intensity around the pre and post shadow phase than the actual Mercury retrograde itself. And that's sometimes really helpful just to frame kind of the cyclical nature of what we're moving through and how we work with it. So there are 3 big themes that I've been thinking about a lot when it comes to Mercury retrograde in Virgo. And the first one is to kind of situate it in the context of this year. This Mercury retrograde is beginning while we are still moving through the last stages of Venus retrograde in Leo, the neighboring sign. Venus retrograde is going until the very beginning of September. So these 2 retrogrades are overlapping in their timelines. And I think that's really beautiful because this Mercury retrograde will then continue on for another week and a half to do its magic, help us work through and help us integrate whatever it is we need to learn about how we're changing and growing. So for me, this is a time to integrate new insights, new visions, understand how you've changed, gain clarity on how you want to embody everything that you have been learning during Venus retrograde ever since we were in July. So this is a really, really beautiful season. This whole September and this whole Virgo season really in general is going to have so much to do with how we want to integrate that into our whole being. What do we want to embody? How do we want that to feel? And that means taking our time. One of my favorite things about Mercury retrograde, actually, which is often what is translated into modern inconveniences, is that Mercury retrograde is all about the stepping out of linear time and the often deep wisdom that we work with when we're working with energetics like the Hanged Man or reverse thinking, which is a very magical ancient tradition. And a lot of it is tied to this idea of doing things backwards rather than forwards. So slowing down to move more speedily through the world, starting at the end to find the beginning. These kinds of phrases that sometimes can feel a little clunky and uncomfortable to initially connect with end up being really beautiful places to do exploration. They also take the pressure off of embodying everything right now, right this second, and instead look at why we feel the pressure to embody as fast as we feel we need to embody. Taking some of that pressure off the linear modality of how we need to go forward in life can actually help us get more truly and clearly in line with what we're really wanting to create in the world. The next theme is probably my favorite one, which is something I've been thinking about a lot as we've been moving through Venus retrograde and just in general in life right now. And that is that in our culture, there's a real pressure to fulfill a linear narrative. It kind of goes back to the first theme, right? There's to make the day that we're in make sense in that linear narrative, to make every single decision we make sense in a way that fits, that we can look back and we can say, I made the smart decision, I made the practical decision, I made the decision that's getting me to my goals. And a lot of times we're carrying around these checklists of how we are moving through the world, how we are making decisions, how we are living our lives. And there's a hidden criteria within that for many of us, maybe not all of us, but I think a lot of us share this, that we need to be making decisions that fit this checklist, fit this making sense linear narrative. And there is value in that, right? Like, we have to have something to ground into. It's good to have goals. It's good to have visions. It's a beautiful experience to have things that we are working toward, and to be a thoughtful person that follows through on projects and ideas and lets their loved ones know what's going on. Of course, of course. But I think that pressure can sometimes get in the way of following our spirit and our soul song, which Virgo energy is so much about following our soul song and finding our inherent frequency, going into the labyrinth of ourselves, that hermit card of the lantern being lit and finding that deep wisdom in ourselves and going toward the well. Sometimes when we're trying to serve that checklist, trying to serve this idea of this is what makes my life make sense, this is why it has value, because it makes sense, because it's the elevator pitch, it's the holiday party spiel that I can give people. Sometimes when we're trying to do service to that in our day-to-day, we are no longer able to enter into our lantern and to our soul frequency, into that whole place that this Mercury retrograde is so about. And so, do you feel like you have to make your life make sense on paper? Do you feel like you have to make your story make sense? Who does it need to make sense to? Does it need to make sense to your internal judge, to your mother-in-law, to your colleagues, to just the world in general? Does it feel like your existence has to make sense when you walk out the door in the morning? I know I have felt that way sometimes, even though nobody else is invested in me making sense walking around in the world, right? So this is a really subtle and interesting place to explore, where you feel like you have to constantly box yourself into making sense in that linear journey, and why, and who does it need to make sense to, and where does that approval need to come from, and releasing some of our grip on ourselves when it comes to that process. And I think this is just a really, really beautiful time of, if you are forcing yourself into storylines, if you are forcing yourself into visions of yourself that look a certain way and it doesn't feel good, this is a season of feeling that and seeing that and acknowledging that, grieving that, and listening to that soul song again and just practicing that and feeling through it. Finally, the final theme is a really basic one, I think, but one that sometimes it's nice to go back to the essentials, right? And that is that obviously Mercury moving through a sign like Virgo is going to be connected to that earthy energy of taking care of our body and our spirits, having respect for both. Just that, just waking up in the day and being like, do I have respect for what my body needs? And can I listen to that and do what I need to do? Maybe I need to take out that extra meeting so that I can slow down a little bit. Maybe I need to drink a little bit more water. I know I have been over caffeinating recently, so I'm needing to just drink some more water, take a breath. It can be whatever it is for you. It's not about coming up with new health and wellness rules for yourself. Once again, we're not trying to set up more making sense regulations for our life moving forward. This is actually about taking out the rules that are forcing us into these really uncomfortable shapes and forcing us to not listen to ourselves, and noticing what we really long for and need in our body and our spirit. What will nourish us? What will bring us back to life? What will feel like it's restoring ourselves to the world and giving ourselves respect when we have an intuitive sense of something, when we have a sense that we need something in our body or our spirit or our energy field. Just really respecting that and playing around with what happens if I spend today actually listening to what I need and not forcing myself through things. And I know that can be tricky to do. A lot of us have big commitments, work, children, family members, projects that need to get done. But I still hope that each of us gets that chance to just totally have a day where we just listen the whole day to our spirit and to our body and see what it wants and needs, and just following it courageously and with an open mind toward ourselves. And I think that's really the thing, right? In the end, this is just a moment, this early September moment when we're moving through this Mercury retrograde, we're finishing up Venus retrograde, of being with ourselves and feeling that wholeness, that wherever our paths have taken us through these years, the good times, the scary times, the unsure times, the mystery of it all, the lack of clarity at times that we might have had in different seasons of our lives, that we can accept that that's been our path. And all those pieces are a part of us, and that's okay, and that's beautiful. We don't need to make it into this suitable story to tell everybody at a superficial cocktail party. And my dog right now, I don't know if you saw the camera shake, but he's taking a nap by my feet. He's rubbing up against the tripod, so you may have some jangling here as you sit with me. He's looking for a comfortable spot. But yeah, it's a beautiful season. I'm really looking forward to sharing it with all of you, and I will be creating some extra materials for this Mercury retrograde as well. And if you have not joined us and you feel like, oh, I don't know, maybe I should have joined earlier, we are still working through Alchemy of Venus retrograde over on Patreon as well. And you can really join that at any time. I would say that those materials are good for life, and they're going to continue to be available. So you could also join us for all of those beautiful materials of finding our soul song, finding that creative voice, finding our pathways and how we want to express ourselves now in this moment in life. That's what the whole series is about. It's really, really beautiful. It's 7 weeks of beautiful stuff. We still have a couple weeks left to go. So I'd love to see you over there on Patreon for all of those materials. So I'd love to see you there. And of course, you can find me on Instagram and my website. And I love it when you stick around here. We have so much more exploring to do as we get into these darker, deeper months of the year. I love being there for people as we go through a very existential and spooky time of year where we really are checking in with ourselves, at least up here in the Northern Hemisphere. I'd love to see you for that. I love you all so much. Thank you for being my beautiful fellow travelers on this road. And I will see you very, very soon.